Hello and welcome to today's lecture. So today is lecture number 7 from chapter number 5. So this is going to be our last lecture on CPU scheduling. Okay. So once again, this is CS 303, chapter number 5, lecture number 7. So what is the topic for today's lecture? Well, today we will discuss the scheduling policies applied in Linux, Windows, and Solaris. Okay, so these are three examples of real life operating systems. Linux and Windows we already know, and Solaris is a version of Unix which was proposed by Sun Microsystems. So these days Solaris is not used very frequently. But since like Linux, it's been derived from Unix, so a lot of features are similar. So as such, we will look at how actual operating systems do process scheduling. So up till now, whatever algorithms we have covered, some variation of those are employed by operating systems. But when you look at an actual system, scheduling is a bit more complex. So if you observe in our examples, we have made some assumptions, right? So what are those assumptions that we made? One example could be that let's say all the processes arrive at the same time. Okay. So this is just to simplify the discussion of the scheduling algorithm. Although in the SRTF, or the shortest remaining time first, we relax that assumption. And then in that shortest remaining time first algorithm, if you recall, the arrival times were different. Another assumption we made was that we can accurately predict the execution costs of the processes which will arrive into the system sometime in the future, right? So we can accurately predict the execution costs of those processes, and as we know, that itself is a hard problem. And therefore what we can do is, if we don't know the exact execution costs, we can estimate them. So we looked at an example of CPU burst cost estimation using a statistical average of the past, right? So that was another assumption. Third assumption we made was in many of the algorithms we have only one CPU. These days all systems from phones to desktops and laptops come with multiple CPUs. Well, towards later in the course, we did look at a multiprocessor scheduling algorithm, right? So like that, we made a bunch of assumptions about the processes, and the goal for making those assumptions was so that we simplify things a bit, and we can focus on the actual scheduling algorithm. So now we'll see on an actual system how scheduling is done. So let's say how does Linux schedule processes, how does Windows schedule processes, how does Solaris schedule processes. So that is the content of this lecture. Okay, now I am on slide 2. The title is operating system examples. So the idea is to get an insight to understand how Linux, Windows, and Solaris schedule processes. So do note that we have two kinds of processes. We already know. One kind is user processes, right? So for example, our Microsoft Word process, our Google Chrome process, our a terminal process, so on. So these are examples of applications. So these are user processes, and the reason we call them user processes is because their execution starts in the user mode, right? So initially for a process we start execution in the user mode, and then eventually whenever it makes a system call, we have a kernel crossing to kernel mode and then back to user with the result. So user processes we have, and then which need to be scheduled. In addition, kernel processes also need to be scheduled. Okay. So any process that is implementing a system call, right, is could be an example of a kernel process. So your Word, Microsoft Word, which is the user process, is running. Some code is executed in user space, which in that code, one thing which needs to be done is printing a file, Word file. So that is an I/O, and therefore we do need the assistance of the kernel in that, because we need the usage of the printer, which is an I/O device, and the access to all I/O devices is regulated and managed by the operating system kernel. So when we print, we fire the command, and then that from the user space, and that results in a system call, and control gets transferred to the kernel space, and then we get our print, and then we go back to the user space with the output. Okay. So like that, so we have the user process part in the Word document, right? And then from time to time we are making system calls, and then a kernel process is taking over. So we could also look at them as user threads and kernel threads. So ideally that's what happens. A Microsoft Word process generates many user threads, each doing a specific task, as we saw in chapter 4. And then likewise we have a set of kernel threads also, right? So main point to take away here is both user and kernel processes and threads need to be scheduled. Okay. So generally we are talking about processes, but a similar kind of scheme could hold for scheduling threads also. So now we look at 3 case studies for Solaris, for Windows XP, and for Linux. How do these schedule? Okay, now I am on slide 3, where we start our discussion with Linux scheduling. So Linux scheduling through version 2.5. So 2.5 is a kernel version, and the latest version, since 2.6, right, uses the O1 scheduler. So once again, Linux version 2.6 onwards uses what we call the O1 scheduler, of the order of 1. You may have studied this in data structures or algorithms. So what this O1 scheduler means that irrespective of the number of processes that need to be scheduled, a scheduling decision can be made in constant amount of time. It's only one operation. Okay. So again, I'll repeat, irrespective of how many processes we have to schedule, each scheduling decision can be made in one operation in a constant amount of time. So how that happens, let us take a look. So Linux scheduler uses preemption, which means if a higher priority task comes, a lower priority one can be interrupted to execute the higher priority task. Okay. So for example, earliest deadline first was preemptive, shortest remaining time first was preemptive, right? So it uses preemption, and it is also priority based, which means the importance of a task is determined by its priority, and the higher is the priority, the earlier the task could run, or the higher the priority, more CPU time could be allocated to the task, right? So these kind of variations are possible. So as such, there are 2 priority ranges in Linux. One is time sharing and real time. So you can look at this as non-real time and real time. So real time definitely are higher priority, as we know. So if you want to see the priority values of various tasks, you can go to the Linux terminal and type in TOP, T-O-P, stands for table of processes. So in the next slide, we'll look at a screenshot of that we got after typing the TOP command. But once you do that, you will be able to see the priority values of all your processes, whether user or kernel. So as far as the priorities are concerned, for real-time processes, they range from 0 to 99, right? And the non-real-time starts from 100 going ahead. And note that we can have multiple processes with the same priority values. So priority value, the highest possible is 0. So lower priority value means higher priority. So highest priority is for processes with the priority level 0, followed by 1, followed by 2. So as you can see, for the real-time processes, the priority values will be 0 to 99. And then in 0 you can have many processes, at 1 you can have many processes, so you can do fine tuning. It's not necessary for each priority value to be assigned only to one process. You can assign a priority value to many processes. So you can say, well, these 10 processes are there and they're all of topmost priority. So rather than giving them priority values of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, you give all of them 0. Right? So that is possible. So as we said, numerically lower values indicate higher priority. And one way in which we give importance is, so the whole idea of priority scheduling is to give more importance to the higher priority processes. To maybe run them earlier or to run them longer, to finish them earlier, things like that. So here what happens is higher priority process gets larger time quantum. So perhaps we're using some version of round robin, each process getting 5 time units. Well, then if the process's priority is very high, maybe it gets 10 or 15 or 20. So top priority maybe gets 20 units, medium priority gets 10, low priority gets 5, something like that. So higher priority gets larger time quantum, which means it will finish earlier. That's the idea. So here, how do we call this O1 scheduler? Well, we have two process queues. One is for runnable processes, one is for expired processes. So what we do is, whenever we have to pick a process to run, we pick the process which is at the head of the run queue. So once again, we are maintaining two queues of processes. One is run queue or runnable queue, other is expired queue. And this is like a multi-level feedback. So processes freely migrate from runnable to expired, expired to runnable. Right? We can do that. So that's possible. So we have two queues. One consists of set of processes which need to run on the CPU. Other is the ones which are expired. And as you can guess, once a process runs for a while, it will be taken from the run queue and placed to the expired queue. Okay. So tasks are runnable as long as they have time left in their time slice, so they're called active tasks. And eventually, as you keep running a task for many times, its time slice will expire, even if it's a high priority one. So then it will have no time left, after which you will take the task and put it in the expired queue. Okay, so what you do is every time you have to make a scheduling decision, you go to the top of the runnable queue, you pick a process there, you run it, and now if the process finishes its time quantum, you migrate the process to the expired queue. If the process does not finish its time quantum, you put it back at the end of the runnable queue. And like this you proceed. Every time you have to pick a process, pick the one at the top of the runnable queue. And once a time quantum is expired, migrate that process to the expired queue. Okay. So eventually what will happen is your runnable queue may become empty. Right? Or there's no task that needs the CPU, or there is no task that has not been assigned the CPU for a while. So eventually what's happening is you have a set of tasks in runnable queue, you're assigning them CPU based on quantum values, and once they take up their quantum, you put them in the expired. So eventually what can happen is your runnable queue is empty, no more tasks. Right? Are the tasks finished? No. The tasks have merely used up their current quantum. They are by no means finished. And where are those tasks now which have finished their quantum? They are in the runnable, the expired queue. So when you have no more active tasks, no more runnable tasks, what you do is you simply exchange the arrays, you swap the arrays. So now your expired queue becomes runnable queue and runnable becomes expired. Right, so you get what's happening? You pick a task from the runnable queue, assign it its time quantum and then move it to expired. Eventually your runnable task queue will become empty, all will be on expired because all processes will eventually use up their current time quantum. And at this stage you swap the queues. So your expired one becomes runnable and runnable becomes expired. Okay, so I hope that's clear. That is what is happening. So this operation is very simple. It's just a matter of exchanging two pointers. Extremely fast operation. And it is an O1 scheduler because at any time there's only one operation you need to do when you have to make a scheduling decision. Always pick the head of the runnable queue. Okay. So now I am on slide 4. The text might be a little bit small, but you can what you can do is you can type this top command on your own Linux machine and you can, maybe the resolution is better there. But here at least we can see what's going on. We have a set of processes. For each process we have a priority value. So again, low priority value means higher priority. So for some one process we have a priority value of -51, another we have 0, then some we have 20, some of them we have RT. RT means real time. So there's a migration process which is real time, and there's another migration process which is real time. So you can do a simple search of what these processes are. So if I just search this migration Linux process, what it does is distributes workload among the CPU cores. Right. So that was what our multiprocessor scheduling algorithm was doing. So you have 4 CPUs or 4 cores, call them CPU or core, and then you have to distribute the workload, distribute the process workload to the different CPUs. So the kernel process, so again this is a kernel process, of course, CPU scheduler part of that. So this kernel process migration distributes workload among CPU cores, and this has been given a top priority. Okay, which is obvious. Kernel processes generally will get higher priority, and this is doing a very important task of distributing the workload among cores. You don't want one processor to be overloaded and the other 3 to be totally empty. So that can be very detrimental to a system. Right? So like that you have, for some processes you have 20. So 20 priority mostly looks like user processes. For some you have 0. So generally you see for system processes you have lower priority value. For kernel ones it's higher. Right? So -51 for kernel, +20 for user, like that. Okay. Other thing we are seeing is a nice value. Okay. The other thing we are seeing is a nice value. So generally, this also goes towards scheduling and priority. And as the name suggests, process can be, very nice or not so nice to other processes. So if a process is very nice to other processes, it means it will sort of yield the CPU to those other processes. If a process is not nice to other processes, it means it will not yield the CPU and it will take the CPU for a longer time. So generally this level of niceness of a process indicates whether it's willing to yield the CPU to other processes or not. Okay, so in the next slide we discuss a bit more about this nice value. Okay, but as such you can see here different processes have different priority values, and in fact you can see multiple processes are sharing the same priority value of 20, even same priority value of 0. Okay, so now I am on slide 5, Linux scheduling in version 2.6.23 onwards. Okay, So here what we have is, now we talk about the completely fair scheduler. Okay. So we'll also discuss the nice value in this. So this is the Linux scheduler, completely fair scheduler. How does it work? You have scheduling classes, multi-level scheduling queue, which means at the top you have let's say priority value 0, many processes in that in a queue, then priority value 1, many processes in a queue, then priority value 2, many processes in a queue, and so on, right? And you can even have negative priority values, and then many associated with that. So many processes with minus 51 priority value. So once again, the logic is lower is the priority value for a process, higher is its priority. Minus 51 is a higher priority than 0. 0 is a higher priority than 20. So what the scheduler will do is it picks the highest priority task in the highest scheduling class. So it will see what is the highest priority queue. So let's say minus 51, and then it will pick whichever one is at the head of the queue. Okay, and so on. Goes down level by level, and in the end it will get to the lower priority ones. So scheduler assigns portion of the CPU to each task. So it's sort of a round robin. Because of the issue of fairness, we want to be fair to all processes. So what we are doing is we are assigning a portion of CPU, also called time quantum, for each task. Okay. Now we have two scheduling classes which are added by default in Linux. Others can be added if there is a need. So what are those two scheduling classes? One is default, which is time shared, which you can also look at as non-real time, and the other is real time. So these two scheduling classes are there. One is default time shared, other is real time. So in general, the real time ones are higher priority than time shared. So now question is, how do we calculate the time quantum for a task? Now here is where nice value comes in. Time quantum is calculated based on the nice value of a process. So nice values, they have 40 different values ranging from minus 20 to plus 19. So if the process is, if its level of niceness to other processes is lowest, not nice at all, it will get a nice value of minus 20. If it's the nicest process of all time with respect to other processes, it will get plus 19. Okay. So general idea is lower nice value indicates higher priority. So you are saying that a process with the nice value of minus 20, not at all nice to other processes, so it gets a higher priority and therefore larger time quantum. A process with nice value of plus 19 is very giving, and it will almost always yield the CPU to other processes, one with plus 19, and therefore it will get a lower priority. So once again, lower nice value indicates higher priority, which indicates higher quantum. Higher nice value indicates lower priority, indicates lower quantum. So default nice value is 0. Okay, and let's say parent is creating a child, it will also inherit a nice value of 0, and then you can change it if you want. Okay, you can change it if you want. If you want to change the nice value, it's possible. So you can just do a Google search and check it out. If you want to change the nice value of a process, how do you do it? It's possible. Very simple. One command you write and you can change it from one value to the other. Okay. So what happens is now the scheduler will calculate the target latency, which means interval of time during which every runnable task should run at least once. So we want to be fair. And we want to say that this is a value we have calculated called target latency, and our goal, our intention is within this time period we want to ensure that each and every task has run at least once. Now it's possible that higher priority tasks run many times, nothing wrong with that, but for the sake of fairness, at least we want to ensure that all tasks, irrespective of their priority values, have run at least one time. So that time interval is target latency. Okay. So now portions of the CPU are assigned to processes based on this target latency. Of course, target latency can increase if a number of active tasks increases. So target latency will depend on the number of tasks. If you have only 2 tasks, we will have a specific target latency value. If you have 100 tasks, of course, what will happen to the target latency value? It will definitely increase. Right? It will definitely increase. Okay, so now I am on slide number 6, talking about the completely fair scheduler. So now the issue is, depending on the priority and nice values, they are used together. So based on the priority value and the nice value, we need to assign CPU times to processes. Right? And we know that higher priority could imply more CPU time. A lower priority could imply less CPU time, and lower nice value could imply more CPU time, and higher nice value could imply less CPU time. So we have a lot of flexibility. At the one end, we could have a highest priority of process with the lowest nice value, so it will get a maximum time. Other end of spectrum, we have a lowest priority process with the highest nice value. It will get very small time, and then we can have in between. We could have a high priority process with smaller nice value. So we can have many variations possible. So now CFS scheduler maintains per task. So task is just another name for a process. Per task virtual runtime in variable v runtime. So for each task, each process, scheduler maintains this value for virtual runtime called v runtime. Okay. So virtual runtime is associated with decay factor based on the priority of a task, which means lower priority task has a higher decay rate. Okay. Decay generally means value will be smaller. So how does it work? Normal default priority yields virtual runtime equal to actual runtime. So whatever is your actual runtime, virtual runtime is exactly the same if you have a normal default priority. So let's say maybe it's 0, right? So default priority task, nice value of 0, right, runs for 200 milliseconds, then its virtual runtime is 200 milliseconds. Okay, so let's say now nice value is 0, so then virtual runtime is equal to actual runtime, 200 milliseconds for both. Now if you have a high priority task, let's say we are controlling this based on the nice value. Let's say now if you have a high priority task, it means its nice value will be higher or lower? Will be lower. Okay. So lower nice value. So if a process with a lower nice value and hence a higher priority runs for 200 milliseconds, its virtual runtime will be less than 200 milliseconds. How less it will be depending on what is the nice value. Lowest nice value will have the smallest virtual runtime. Similarly, a low priority task with a nice value of greater than 0, if it runs for 200 milliseconds, its virtual runtime will be more than 200 milliseconds. And now, the process we pick becomes very simple. It is the one with the smallest virtual runtime. In other words, with the highest priority. Okay, so what we are saying is, how does this completely fair scheduler works? The basic philosophy is it's a priority based algorithm. So a task with the higher priority will get the CPU earlier. Okay. So what it does is it looks at the nice value. And it maintains a variable called virtual runtime or v runtime for every process, and the rate of change of this variable depends on the nice value or whether it's changing or not, V runtime, it depends on the nice value. If the nice value is 0, virtual runtime is equal to actual runtime. If the nice value is negative, virtual runtime is less than actual runtime. And if the nice value is positive, virtual runtime is greater than actual runtime. Okay, and you always pick the process with the lowest virtual runtime, with the highest priority. So how much virtual runtime will be less, as I said, depends on the priority. So perhaps if it has a value of nice value of -1, virtual runtime might be -199 or maybe -195. If it has a nice value of -10, maybe virtual runtime may be 100. So like that it can decay. Now as an example, if we have let's say two tasks, one is CPU bound and one is IO bound. Assume that both tasks have the same nice value. How will they be scheduled? Okay. So once again, you have a CPU bound task and an IO bound task. Both have the same nice value for simplicity. Okay. Both have the same nice value. How are they scheduled? So once we think about it, typically the IO bound task will run only for short periods before blocking for additional IO, right? And the CPU bound task will exhaust its time period whenever it has the opportunity to run on a processor. So IO bound will run for only short periods of time before blocking for additional IO, and the CPU bound task will definitely exhaust its time period allocated whenever it has opportunity to run on a processor, right? Therefore, the value of V runtime will eventually be lower for the IO bound task, right? So V runtime will be lower for the IO bound task, because obviously it's going to run for shorter times. It's an IO bound, so it's going to run for a shorter time before it blocks for IO. So V runtime for this will be smaller and giving the IO bound task a higher priority than CPU bound. So at that point, if a CPU bound task is executing, when an IO bound task becomes eligible to run, right? So if CPU bound task is executing, when an IO bound task becomes eligible to run, so for example, when the IO is completed and we see that a CPU bound is running, then IO bound task will preempt the CPU bound. Okay. So again, the values of nice are same, so the decay will be same in V runtime, but as such the IO bound will be running for a small period of time. So we can assume that let's say nice value is 0 for both, right? The IO and CPU bound, nice value is 0. So which means virtual runtime is actual runtime. So naturally actual runtime for IO bound will be less, because it will be quickly go off to do IO. So therefore it will get a higher priority. Okay. Okay, so here I am on slide 7. This is showing completely fair scheduler. So how are the processes implemented? We can use a red black tree, balanced binary search tree based on the value of virtual runtime. So we know binary search tree. The defining property is, so it's a binary tree. So for each process, only two child processes, and then the property is for each task, all tasks in the left subtree will have a value less than the task in question, and all tasks in the right subtree will have a values larger than the task in question, and this property will hold for each and every task in the queue. So therefore, with that, which node or which task will have the minimum value of virtual runtime? It will be the leftmost child at the lowest level. So in this particular slide, it will be the process or task with called T7. T7 will have the smallest virtual runtime. T9 will have the largest virtual runtime. Okay. So discovering the smallest virtual runtime has a complexity of the order of log n. Right. So for eight nodes we have 3 operations. For 16 nodes we have 4 operations. For 1024 nodes we have 10 operations. And if we if we just do the math, if we extrapolate, then we have log to the base 2n as the number of operations to find a particular node in this tree. Okay. So generally performance is quite good. Okay. Okay, now I am on the last slide for the Linux scheduler. So here we are looking at the various priority levels. So how many do we have? We have 140 different priority levels, and again lower level means higher priority. So highest priority is for tasks or processes with priority level 0. Lowest one is for tasks or processes with priority level 139. So for real-time processes, priority levels of 0 to 99 are reserved, and for non-real-time normal processes, priority levels of 100 to 139 are reserved. And note that for each priority level, whether it's 0 or 100, we can have many processes with that value of priority level. Okay, so maybe 10 processes with priority level 0, 12 processes with priority level 100, and so on. Okay. And what we see is we have a mapping between the nice value and the global priority. Okay. So nice value of -20 maps to global priority of 0, which is the highest value for a non real-time process, right? So nice value of -20 maps to global priority of 0, and a nice value of +19 maps to global priority of 139. So 100 to 139 we have 40 priority levels, each mapping to one nice value. So which means if you've been assigned a nice value of -20, then you are mapped to global priority of 100. Which means you're the the highest priority among all normal tasks. Nice value of +19 maps to global priority 139, so you have the lowest priority among all tasks. Okay. Okay. So generally you execute the real time. So the algorithm is you execute the real time processes first, and if you have many among real time, you use the priority level to decide. So one is level 0, one is level 10, execute the 0 first. Of course you may have many with one level. So in level 0 if you have 5, well then you can do first come first serve perhaps, or you can do earliest deadline first perhaps. So run the real time first, then the normal ones, and within each category look at the priority level and then decide which one to execute. Okay. So real-time tasks can have static and dynamic priorities. If you recall, in the earliest deadline first algorithm, there the priorities were dynamic. In rate monotonic, they were static. So both options are available, right? Dynamic priority would be better, but there's more overhead because you're changing the priorities dynamically. Okay. Static priorities, maybe performance is not that good, but overhead with the changing priorities is not there, right? So because that OS overhead will be there if you want to change the priorities. You have to go into the process control block, run some code to change the value. It has some overhead, right? Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 9, and now we talk about Windows scheduling. So you see that for Windows and Solaris we will not spend too much time because a lot of details for these are not known. A lot of details about the schedulers are not known because they are mostly closed source operating systems. But for the Linux, everything about the scheduler is in public domain, and therefore naturally, the source code is available, so we can we know more about those Linux scheduler, and therefore you can see we discussed in quite a bit of depth. So that same depth in terms of discussing the scheduling you will not find in Windows or other kind of schedulers because they're closed source. So the code is not in public domain. Okay. So having said that, we still try to get some idea. So now moving to Windows scheduling. So Windows also, like Linux, uses priority based preemptive scheduling. So you see that no matter which operating system we talk about, some common scheduling techniques will be used by all of them. So Windows uses priority based preemptive scheduling. So you have priority levels, and a higher priority can preempt a lower priority one. Okay. So highest priority process runs next, just like Linux. So generally, whenever you have a priority based algorithm, you will have preemption also, because that's a general idea. If a lower priority process is running and a higher priority one comes in, then you want to interrupt the execution of the lower priority one and give the CPU to the higher priority process. So generally, preemption and priority based scheduling go hand in hand. Okay. So highest priority process runs next, and dispatcher is the name of the scheduler here. So what Linux calls scheduler, Windows calls this dispatcher. Okay. So dispatch a process to its appropriate CPU. Which process to dispatch, which CPU it goes to, scheduling decision. So in general, processes will run until either they block, perhaps for some IO, or if they use a time slice. You're using round robin, time slice is over, or whether it process is preempted by a higher priority process. So under these scenarios, the process will stop running. It either blocks for IO, or its time quantum is up, or it is preempted by a higher priority process, and you can probably add a fourth. It finishes execution. So eventually time quantum is 5 and it only has 3 to run. It finishes before using its time slice. That scenario can also be there. So here again you have two categories, real time and non-real time. Real time with deadlines, and real time processes can preempt non-real time ones. Here we have a 32 level priority scheme, 32 values of priorities. Okay, and we have different classes just like Linux. So we have a variable class with the priority value 1 to 15 and real time class with value 16 to 31. Okay, so here looks like higher priority value means a higher priority, unlike Linux. So generally whatever Linux does, Windows does the opposite anyway, right? So there's for each priority, as with Linux, there is a queue. So I can have a real time class with the priority level 16, and then I can have a queue of processes in it. And if no runnable task, a special task called idle task runs. So eventually goal of a scheduler is always the same to pick the next runnable task. If there is no runnable task, then an idle task runs, and its job is to just wait till a task becomes ready for execution. Okay. So if no ready task is found, the dispatcher will execute a special task called idle task. It just keeps on running idly till the next runnable task is there. Okay, so now I am on slide 10. So we started a discussion on Windows scheduling. So the Win32 API identifies several priority classes to which a process can belong. So what is this Win32 API? So just like we have a POSIX API for threads, right? We also have a similar API for Windows as well, Win32. So note that although we are talking about processes here, Generally, we can use the same techniques to schedule threads in a process as well. No problem. So several priority classes to which a process can belong. So real time, high priority, above normal, normal, below normal, idle, right? So of course the highest, most important would be the ones in real time priority class. And of course the priority class of a process can be altered using an API function called set priority class. So this exists in Linux as well. So the designers have the freedom to change the priority level or priority of a class, just like you can change the nice value. So if you see a process in the system and nice value is quite high, and as a result of which it's not getting CPU for very long or long periods of time, you can manually execute a system call and change its nice value to something which is a more negative, smaller, and then with the result that it will get the CPU more for a longer time. It's possible. So many priority classes, and then for more fine-grained scheduling, a process with a given priority class can have a relative priority as well. Time critical, highest, above normal, normal, below normal, lowest, and idle. So we have these bunch of priority classes, right? Real time and high priority, above normal, normal, below normal, idle. And then for each priority class, you can have relative priority values as well. So in real time, you can have time critical, highest, above normal, normal, below normal, lowest, idle. And then likewise for high priority, you can also have time critical, highest, above normal. So it just gives you more fine grain, more control over the scheduling. So for real time, if you have a set of processes in the real time class, then maybe you want to say all of them don't have the same priority. So one is some are more important than the other. So one which is more important, you can put it in time critical, less important, highest or above normal, and so on. So just to give you more flexibility, more control. So the priority class and the relative priority, they combine to give the actual numeric priority value. So base priority of a process is normal within the class. Okay. It is 24 for real time, 4 for idle. We'll soon see. So moreover, if the quantum expires, the priority is lowered but never below base. So generally what happens when the time quantum expires, it means the process has just used the CPU. So then in the for the sake of fairness, its priority is lowered a bit, so that other tasks can also execute. If it always has a higher priority, and even after using the quantum, its priority is not lowered, it will keep on getting the CPU, which will not be fair to the other processes. So if quantum expires, priority is lowered but never below the base priority. Okay. So again, it's a trade-off. We want to lower the priority but not too much, because if we lower it too much, then it can starve. Okay. So we have to sort of juggle and sort of get the middle path. So here I am on slide 11 now, which shows, has a table which shows what we were talking about. So if you look from left to right, and then top to bottom. So top to bottom we have the relative priorities, and then from left to right we have the priority classes. So you have real time, high, above normal, normal, below normal, idle, and then you have time critical, highest, above normal, normal, below normal, lowest, idle. So for real time we are seeing that it has different values for different processes. So within real time class, time critical has a value of 31, highest as 26, above normal is 25, idle as 16. So here again, larger value means higher priority. It's the opposite of Linux. Likewise, we have a high class, and then again, depending on your relative priority, you have numeric priority value. So you need to calculate the numeric priority of a particular process. You need two things. You need to know what is the priority class, and then within the priority class you need to know what is the relative priority. So below normal class, normal priority 6, real time class, time critical priority 31, like that. Okay, so it gives you a good amount of flexibility, good amount of control, right? So that was Windows. Now I move on to slide 12, Solaris. So this is a version of Unix operating system, the Solaris OS. So again, like Linux and Windows, it also uses priority based scheduling, definitely, and it has 6 priority classes available: time sharing, interactive, real time, system, fair share, and fixed priority. Each of them has a code. Time sharing is TS, real time is RT, system is SYS, fixed priority is FP, fair share FSS, interactive IA. So the rule is a process can be in one class at a time, not more than one. Each class can have its own priority scheduling algorithm. So for fair share, maybe you want to use round robin. For real time, maybe you want to use earliest deadline first, and like that, right? So for example, time sharing supports dynamic priorities and time quantum of variable lengths using multi-level feedback queue. So for time sharing, let's say what you do is you have a multi-level feedback queue algorithm. So many queues, right? Each can have its own scheduling algorithm, and then you have dynamic priorities supported. So which means a process can move from one queue to the other. So if the top queue has the highest priority, once a process goes into that queue, gets a CPU, then it moves to second queue, it gets a lower priority. So you can have migration from one queue to the other, and each queue has a different priority. So migration among queues implies changing of priorities or dynamic priorities. And as such, there is an inverse relationship between priority and time quantum. So which seems to suggest if the priority is high, time quantum is low. If the priority is low, time quantum is high. Which looks a bit strange. So let's try to explore this a bit. So now I am on slide 13, still discussing Solaris scheduling. So here some convention: a higher priority number means a higher priority, and vice versa. So it means it's similar to Linux or Windows. It's similar to Windows. Higher priority number means higher priority, and vice versa. And the rule here is the scheduling rule is higher priority processes get smaller time slice, and vice versa. So higher priority processes get smaller time slice, lower priority processes get larger time slice. So reason for that, what they have is that which kind of processes will get a higher priority. So they want to give a higher priority to IO bound processes, interactive processes, right? Because we saw whenever we have both CPU and IO, generally a good idea to give a higher priority to IO, but at the same time don't stop the CPU ones also. But so generally, the IO ones, because they need a CPU for a small time period, and then anyway they're off to do IO. So take the IO ones quickly, execute them, and then you get good throughput, good average, wait time, average response time, and then let the CPU one run. That's generally what most operating systems do. So here the idea is the IO bound or the interactive processes, the processes which don't need the CPU for extended time periods, they will get the higher priority. And likewise, the CPU bound processes, the processes which need CPU for a long time duration, will get a lower priority. Right. So anyway, the higher priority ones, which means the IO bound ones, get smaller time quantum. Well, simply because they don't need the larger time quantum. Right? They don't need it. Okay. So table on the next slide shows some priority and time quantum values for time sharing and interactive processes. So I will just go to the book and try to read them, since I do need to come back to these observations. So the table is given on the next slide, and here we have the priority number, the time quantum value, the time quantum expired, and the return from sleep value for different processes. Okay, so here the observation is lower priority processes get larger time slice. Right, so here again, like Windows, lower priority means lower priority value. So 0, it's getting time quantum 200, 59 is getting time quantum only 20. So 0 priority value is the low priority one, so it's getting high time quantum, because those are generally CPU bound. Highest priority value is 59, it's getting time quantum of 20. That's one observation, that lower priority processes getting larger time slices. 0 and 5 priority values getting 200 time quantum, and higher priority processes getting smaller time slices. So 55 getting 40, 59 priority getting 20. That's one observation. What is this time quantum expired quantity? This is a new priority of a thread once it uses up its entire time quantum without blocking. So time quantum expired is the new priority of a thread once it uses up its entire time quantum without blocking. Priorities for these are lowered. So as we said, once a process uses its time quantum, then to be fair to the other processes, for this particular process which has used its time quantum, its priority is reduced a bit. Okay. So you can see for 59 time quantum expired is 49, so new priority is 49, it's been lowered. For 55 it's 45, 50 it's 40, 45 is 35. For 0 it's 0, for 5 it's 0, 10 it's 0, 15 is 5. So the observation is, as soon as it uses its time quantum totally without blocking, the priorities are lowered. And the other fourth one is return from sleep. So return from sleep is the priority of a process that is returning from sleep after an IO wait. So priorities for these are increased. So what happens is, you have an IO bound, let's say, now it's waiting for IO, it's waiting for a long time, you put it in blocking sleep state. Now once the IO is done, once it wakes up, then it needs the CPU. And for such processes, the priorities are increased a bit, so that they get the CPU. Because anyway they waited for a long time. Now that once they're ready to run, they should probably get the CPU earlier. And anyway they're IO bound, so they have a higher priority anyway. So the priorities for these are increased. Okay. So you can see 58, 59, 58, right. So for 55, 55 priority, it increases to 58. 45 priority increases to 56. 40 priority increases to 55, right, like that. So generally, let's look at an example again to recap. You have a process with the last one, the last row. You have a process with priority 59. Which means it's a top priority, which means it's an IO bound, which means time quantum will be less. So time quantum is 20, doesn't need more. And time quantum expired is, once it uses its time quantum, what is its new priority. So for fairness, we want to lower it a bit. So from 59 it goes to 49, still quite high. And then return from sleep, once, if this process is an IO bound, so if this process is doing IO and it wakes up, then we want to increase the priority a bit. In this case it's the same, 59 remains the same, but other cases it increases. Second last row, from 55 it goes to 58. So generally for a process, if one observation is a higher priority one, give it, it's an IO bound, give it small quantum. If it's a low priority one, it's a CPU bound, give it a large time quantum. And once that's one observation. Second observation is, if it uses its time quantum, lower its priority by a bit. And third observation is, if a process wakes up after an IO, increase its priority by a bit. So these are the observations for Solaris. So now I am on slide 14 and we see the Solaris dispatch table, scheduling table. Dispatch means just to send it a process to a CPU. And here you can see, what we were talking about. Lower priority ones, they are CPU bound, they get high time quantums. High priority ones get low time quantum, they are IO bound. And then time quantum expired, you want to reduce the priority by a bit. And then if a process is returning from sleep, you want to increase the priority by a bit. Now if you want, you can keep the priority same. 59 it's same, right? 59 it stays the same. Okay. So this is the Solaris dispatch table. So I hope the various philosophies, the various observations are clear. What kind of a time quantum will a high priority process get? What will be the nature of such a process? Once a process executes on the CPU, what will happen to its time quantum? Once a process wakes up from sleep, what will happen to its priority? Those kind of things. So now I am on slide 15. This is a Solaris scheduling priority sort of structure, and you can see you have 170 priority levels. In each level you can have many tasks. So you are seeing sort of similar philosophy among all of the operating systems. They are all priority based. They have set of priority levels, and within each level you can have many tasks, one particular queue for each level. So lowest is 0, highest is 169. So you have 170 levels, and the highest value importance is given to interrupt threads. So once again, we can, as far as scheduling is concerned, we can use the terms threads and processes in place of each other. So just like we can schedule processes, we can schedule threads also. So highest priority is given to interrupt threads, then to real time, then to system, probably kernel ones, and then to user ones, fair share, fixed priority, time share, interactive. And even among these you can have sub different priorities, right? So higher priority means higher value. 169 is the top, 0 is the minimum. Okay. So lowest global priority, lowest is 0, highest is 169. Scheduling order, of course the higher priority ones go first, interrupt, and then last is the user kind of threads or processes. Okay. Okay, so now I am on slide 16. So that finishes our discussion on Linux, Windows and Solaris scheduling. So next couple of slides before we wind up this chapter. Algorithm evaluation, slide number 16. So how do we, so now we have a bag full of scheduling algorithms. So how do we pick a particular scheduling algorithm, right? So we looked at many: first come first serve, FCFS, shortest job first, SJF, priority based, rate monotonic, earliest deadline first, round robin. They could be preemptive or non-preemptive. So which is the best algorithm? And it's not an easy question to answer, turns out. It actually depends on what the application is and what kind of requirements you have. What exactly do you want to do performance wise? That will have an impact on which algorithm you pick. So if your goal is to meet deadlines, of course your choices are rate monotonic and earliest deadline first. If your goal is to maximize CPU utilization, so then you want to pick something non-preemptive, because in preemptive you can have a lot of context switches. Each context switch is overhead, and that will sort of reduce the CPU utilization, more idle time. If you want to minimize average wait time, then probably shortest job first. If you want to maximize throughput, how many tasks execute per unit time, again maybe shortest job first. So depending on the application, depending on the requirement, you can probably pick particular one. If you want to be fair, you can use round robin. Right? If you want to be fair but at the same time you have priorities, then assign time quantums based on the priority values. Tasks which have a higher priority may get larger time quantum. So many variations are possible, right? So although when we want to answer this question, we can do some rigorous process, and we could either do an analytical modeling or we could do a simulation, which can help us to sort of compare algorithms with each other, right? So now I am on slide 17. So the question is, how do we evaluate algorithms? How do we compare algorithms? So if I want to using waiting time as the average waiting time as a metric, how does FCFS compare with shortest job first? Using meeting deadlines as a metric, how does earliest deadline first compare with rate monotonic, and so on. So one way we can answer this question is using analytical evaluation. So use a given scheduling algorithm and the system workload to produce a formula or number that evaluates the performance of the algorithm for the workload. So if you have some sort of formula, some sort of equation, some sort of bound, that can help us. So for example, we have that for earliest deadline first, and the bound is earliest deadline first is guaranteed to meet all deadlines, right? Guaranteed to meet all deadlines if combined utilization of all processes is less than or equal to 1. So this formula really helps us. All we need to do is, given the set of processes, we need to calculate the utilization of each process, execution cost divided by its period. Then we add the utilization of all the processes, and if it is less than 1, it's schedulable, otherwise it is not. Less than 1, all deadlines met, otherwise not. Okay. We can also run various algorithms for the same input. So given the same task, run all the algorithms, see what values you get for average wait time, average response time, and then you compare, see which one is better, right? Compare the results. Okay. So over a set of inputs, this technique may indicate that trends that can be analyzed and proven separately. For example, if minimizing average wait time is sole criteria, shortest job first will be the best choice. So you know which criteria you want, and you measure that, which means you feed the same input to various algorithms and see the value for that criteria, and whichever has a best value, then that is the answer. Okay, now I am on slide 18. So what we would need to do here is simulations. So we write a computer program, right, that simulates the scheduling algorithm. So we have a queue, and then we do first come first serve. We implement the queue using C programming, and then we feed in tasks, and then we calculate the finish time and the schedule length for all of them. So we write a computer program that simulates the scheduling algorithm, and then to that computer program we feed in a lot of inputs and see what kind of outputs we get, and then we analyze the results. So for example, if the execution costs are increased, what will happen to the average wait time? If execution costs are go up, the average wait time will also go up. If the execution costs are increased, will the processes still meet the deadline? Well, if you increase the execution cost, perhaps you will reach a break point, and then deadlines will be missed no matter what you can do. Because if you are increasing the execution costs, your execution cost divided by period, that utilization value also increases, and eventually it can cross 1. Yeah. and execution cost could be generated using a uniform distribution. So you say that execution cost vary from 1 to 100. So you have the 100 values and each value has an equal probability to be picked. Right. So now I'm on slide 19. So this is this shows the evaluation of CPU schedulers by simulation. So you have actual process execution in which the processors are executing CPU for some time, IO for some time, then CPU, then IO, then CPU, then IO. Right. So you have a bunch of processes that are executing. You have the execution traces given, and then you feed them all into different simulators. One simulator simulating FCFS, another simulator which is a piece of code simulating SGF, third simulator simulating RR with quantum 14, and then for that same process input you get performance statistics, and then you can compare. Okay, for this scenario FCFS is better. For throughput SGF is better. So you can actually operate like that. So idea is to write a program as simulator that implements a scheduling algorithm, to have many of these, to feed the same process characteristics, execution costs to all of them, and then see what kind of results you get, and then compare them to figure out which one is better.